Today, we're digging into a paper that takes on one of the biggest, most common objections to Christianity, the whole show me the evidence argument, and it completely flips it on its head. The argument here is that the debate isn't actually about evidence at all. It's about something much deeper, authority, and how we even understand reality itself. You've heard this question a million times, right? Where is the evidence? It feels like the ultimate trump card in any debate. It sounds so simple, so scientific, and it immediately puts the person of faith on the back foot, as if they have to prove something in a lab. But what if the problem isn't the evidence or lack of it? The paper we're looking at makes a fascinating case that the real issue is actually hidden inside the question itself. It all hangs on what we're assuming the word evidence even means in the first place. Okay, so let's really break this down. Where does this modern, no evidence claim actually come from? Well, the paper argues that this claim doesn't come from a scientific discovery. It actually comes from a philosophical belief system called materialism. This is the idea that the only thing that's truly real is the physical world. Stuff we can touch, see, and measure. And while that's a really powerful idea in our modern world, it's so important to see it for what it is, an assumption about reality, not a proven fact of reality.
And this is where the paper points out a pretty deep irony. To even make the argument for materialism, you have to use tools that aren't material themselves, like logic and reason. I mean, you can't put logic in a test tube, right? So the objection kind of fails its own test. And on top of that, it demands that God must be some kind of measurable object within the universe, which completely misunderstands what theology has ever claimed God to be.
So this leads us right to the heart of the paper's argument. We're not just talking about one kind of evidence. We're actually dealing with two totally different competing ideas of what evidence is. So first, you've got the modern view. This is probably the one we're most familiar with. Evidence is neutral, objective data. It's the kind of stuff you can observe and repeat in a lab. And, this is key, it doesn't ask anything of you personally. You can just look at it from a safe, detached distance. But the paper presents a completely different view, one it draws from its scriptural sources. In this framework, evidence is never neutral. It's always tied to a claim of authority, and that claim demands a response from you. To really see the evidence, in this view, is to recognize that it has a claim on your life, on your allegiance. Okay, so that might sound a little abstract. How does this actually work in practice? Well, the paper suggests we think about evidence less like we're in a science lab and more like we're in a courtroom. A perfect example the paper uses is the story of the Exodus. Think about it. This event isn't presented like a repeatable science experiment. No, it's framed as a public, legal, and political showdown. First, there's a direct confrontation with the rival authorities, the gods of Egypt. Then, there's a clear demonstration of superior power through the plagues. And finally, you have the establishment of a brand new moral and legal order with the law at Sinai. The evidence here isn't just data. It's a demonstration of who has the right to rule. And this brings us to one of the most important takeaways. If evidence is really a claim of authority, then disagreeing with it isn't just an intellectual mistake, like you're missing a piece of information. The paper argues that within this framework, rejecting the evidence is understood as a moral act, an act of resisting a rightful authority. So, how does this whole evidence as authority framework help us tackle some of the biggest questions we all grapple with? Like where our sense of right and wrong comes from, or why there's so much suffering in the world. Let's start with morality. The paper points out that a naturalistic worldview can do a pretty good job of explaining why humans behave morally. It helps us survive, it keeps society from falling apart. But where it struggles is explaining our deep, gut-level sense of moral obligation. That feeling that we ought to be good, that some things are just plain wrong no matter what. The paper's point is that this feeling of ought really only makes sense if there's a real moral law behind it, and a law needs a lawgiver. This framework also gives us a totally different way to look at the problem of evil. The classic objection is, if God is good, why is there so much suffering? But this paper flips that question around. It argues that our very outrage against evil is a kind of evidence. Why are we so angry about injustice? Because we have this innate sense that this isn't how things are supposed to be. From this perspective, evil isn't proof that God is absent, it's evidence of a broken moral order, a cosmic rebellion against a rightful authority. This leads to another huge point. The central claims, like the resurrection of Jesus, are presented as historical events, not as scientific ones. So the paper argues they need to be judged with the tools of a historian,
looking at eyewitness testimony, assessing credibility, considering the best explanation for the facts, not with the tools of a lab scientist, which are designed for things you can repeat over and over.
So all of this builds up to the paper's conclusion about what's really at the heart of this conflict over evidence.
And here, the paper makes a pretty bold claim, drawing it directly from its source texts. The fundamental issue at play isn't a lack of information or ignorance. It's an active resistance to or suppression of what a person on some level already knows.
Well, that's the obvious next question, isn't it? If something is being suppressed, what is it?
And here is the paper's final answer. What's being resisted isn't really a set of facts or data points. It's a claim of rule. It's the challenge that a higher authority poses to our own deep-seated desire to be the ultimate authority in our own lives, our own personal autonomy.
So after this whole analysis, we're left with a completely reframed question. The paper suggests that maybe the most important question we can ask isn't, is there enough evidence in a test tube? The real question, the one that gets to the heart of the matter, is a deeply personal and political one. Who or what has the ultimate authority to define reality, to define morality, to define your purpose? In the end, it all comes down to this. Who has the right to rule?